a little bit of a
Oh, you keep
sorry.
going. Yeah. No.
I had a little bit of like tendon in my tooth. I was like, oh snap! I just ate two chuck eyes before we got on, but now I'm good.
Uh, I keep those like the floss stick things in my bathroom because it's like, yeah, you get a couple tendons in there or whatever
Yep,
from eating steaks. And
yep.
we're recording, we're gonna segue right in.
That's perfect.
This
Love
is
it.
like this is actually my favorite intro right now because I'm gonna keep all this.
Okay, beautiful. That is good. It's good when it
Uh,
just naturally happens.
Welcome to the Primal Foundations podcast. I'm your host, Tony Pascola. Our guest today is Danny Vega, fitness coach, podcaster, and online entrepreneur. In 2016, Danny discovered the ketogenic lifestyle, which changed his approach to health and nutrition. Danny is an advocate for the carnivore diet. And Danny, welcome to the Primal Foundations podcast.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. And I want to kind of set the tone of your backstory. So 2016, how do you get into the ketogenic diet and how do you kind of like make your way over to the carnivore space?
Yeah. So I gotta back up to like 2015. I was competing in powerlifting at the time. That was my obsession. And I got to the top 50 in my weight class in the country, and then I got to top 25 in the 220 weight class. And I was training for a big meet, and it was raw with no wraps, which it's a big difference, just in sleeves. And I know now that I tore my meniscus prepping for that meet. And I still was able to deadlift 700 and squat 610 that meet, but I couldn't even take my third squat attempt. And anyways, like fast forward, I end up the next year pulling out of a meet, and I'm like, you know what? I need to just get healthy. I'm banged up, my knee's banged up, and started by doing like a bodybuilding diet. That's all I knew, and it was my buddy who was a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, and he coached me, and super low fat. By the end, I was shredded. I was miserable, shredded and miserable.
What,
And I
what
was
were what were you eat? What were you eating?
a lot of it was white rice, ground turkey, ground beef, what else? Lots of things when you don't have fat to like add flavor. So I would do lots of like, mango salsa on my rice and ground beef. And but started above 400 grams of carbs and went down super low on the carbs. But you know, it's such a terrible way when you cut the carbs and the fat. It literally, you have no energy. And so what ends up happening, a bunch of hormonal things happen. Leptin starts to increase, and you start to develop that leptin resistance, and then you get that insulin resistance. So and it's all because your body is adjusting to this starvation, and it's just like, pack on the fat or we die. You know what I mean? So anyways, what ends up happening is, like, towards the end, I was binging every weekend. And it was like, it would cheat day turned into a cheat weekend. And right around this time, I'm still getting healthy. And my buddy Trevor from the gym at the time, he's a great friend now, but we just knew each other from the gym. He was like telling me about this keto diet, and I'm like, what is this keto diet? He's like, yeah, you lower your inflammation. And I'm like, wait, no carbs? That's ridiculous. That's absurd, you know? So I guess that kind of stuck in my mind, because every time he'd show me, he'd see me, he'd like, check out these keto pancakes. He'd show me like all these things. And I guess I decided after Memorial Day weekend of 2016 that just for quality of life, I'm gonna try this keto diet. And maybe I'm already at my goal. I'm already as lean as I want to be. And what ended up happening in my case is that I had the carbs low already. So I just brought them a little bit lower and added a bunch of fat. And literally 2 days in, I was living in a house at the time where, we had 2 floors, and my bedroom was on the second floor. And I used to, like, creak down the steps every morning. It was like, it took an hour to get my body going, because I was just beat up, from squatting and deadlifting. And, I played on AstroTurf in college. And so I remember, like, walking down those stairs after a few days, I felt like a ballerina. I was like, I had some pep in my step. And that's what initially with keto, I was just like, I did the research of like, what is the keto diet? And I constructed like as I would with any other thing, you know, what my diet would look like. And I followed that. And, you know, when I noticed those effects within a few days, I told my boy, he was doing grad work here at University of Tampa. And I was like, send me everything you have. And he said, like, he sent me like 41 published papers. I read through all of those. I started looking for books. I read The Art and Science of Low Carb Performance, which to this day is still probably top 3 books for me. Finney and Volek, classic. You know, it had everything that, you know, the typical keto sphere at the time, which was very small, was mostly focused on weight loss and, you know, disease, people that were sick. This had protein, you know, recommendations. This had all this stuff. So I got obsessed with it, reached out to a guy, Brian Williamson, from, what was the podcast? Oh my gosh, not Keto Evangelist podcast. And I was just like, look, I'm a college athlete. You know, I used to be in strength and conditioning. I've the keto diet has been awesome for me. If you ever want to do anything about, you know, talk about that, I'm happy to talk about it. Little did I know that he was starting a podcast called The Ketogenic Athlete. And so he had me on, we hit it off, and I become his co-host. And that's how it all started. And in August of 2017, he had someone on, which to this day is one of my favorite people, Amber O'Hearn, carnivore. And she was just talking about this carnivore diet. And I was like, I always used to think that I needed to hit all my nutritional bases. I got to get, you know, the fruits and the vegetables. And here's this woman saying, I don't have to do that. And I was like, so we ended up trying something. We called it steak, August surf and turf. All we did was eat salmon and beef all month. And that was before it really blew up. And actually we interviewed Dr. Baker. Dr. Baker and I go way back. We go back like now 6 years. We had him on way before all the, and so I a lot of people were keto for a long time. Then they did carnivore. For me, I was keto for a year. So I've been mostly carnivore on and off since 2017. And obviously I've learned a lot. I've done a lot of experimentation, but pretty much my baseline for most of the time. So that's my long drawn out answer.
It seems like that is a super common thing of I'm gonna give this a whirl. I'm gonna give it a try. I want to take a step back to talk about like that bodybuilder diet. We see that so much, and this is coming from somebody who I wrestled all through high school, and I was on a pretty like tough elite team, and it's like we're really cutting down, and we're really getting low.
Crazy. I respect wrestlers the most, actually, out of any sport, in high school at least. In college, you got to throw the swimmers in there too, because they're out of their minds. Like they spend the day in the pool. They, you know, but wrestlers, like between the cutting, the workouts, just the mental fortitude that it builds at that age, I don't think there's any other sport that comes even close.
Yeah, and it's boxer. You have boxers and all those things like that, but that's not in the high school setting.
Not in high school.
It's really tough. You have your own clubs and things like that, or gyms. But we all knew, that's all we knew is, hey, eat like really low carb and don't eat fat. And I wish I would have known what I know now. I'm like looking back, I would have been like on weight every week. I would have been weight managing, but you mentioned something that is really, it clicked in my head as soon as you said it. It's like you were on this diet, you're going really strict, and all of a sudden you would have these binge days and weekends.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And
that's scientifically, that's, sorry to interrupt. It just
no, go.
You know, the hedonic effect of carbs, of sugar is like up to 72 hours. Once you binge that one day, the next, for up to like 2 days later, you're going to be craving it again. So you better up the fat, or just don't do it. Just don't cheat. You know, I have my thoughts on cheating. I do something different, but yeah, anyways.
Yeah. I've learned that, like, just from wrestling, and even when I was a kid, like I have to be an abstainer of these things. And if I have it, it's got to be real low, like a bite or two, and call it quits, you know, because life takes over, right? You want to have, you're sharing a dessert with somebody, you're going to have a little something, but that's it. And you have to really be diligent about it. Cause like you said, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 bites. It is a slippery roller coaster. And with wrestlers, especially with even bodybuilders, they get into this really bad relationship with food of just
Oh yeah.
gorging themselves.
Oh yeah. And like, you know, it's so sad. I think the most prevalent is in bikini, because bikini's pretty easy to step in, not having built that much muscle. That's changing now. Even the bikini look is changing, but it's a good way for people to get in to getting ready for a show. And then what ends up happening is, like, if they don't understand those pitfalls, the rebound after, even if you're diligent with your post show, like, you know, where you're ramping the calories up, you're still going to rebound, and, you know, not being aware of the mental effects of that. So what ends up happening is they do these cuts, and these cuts are terrible. I mean, you know, the fact that people are eating 700 calories a day that's criminal, dude. Like, you know, you just don't get that low. That's crazy. Anyways, then they get that huge leptin rebound, because now, after starvation, the body's just going to be like a sponge, and it just wrecks you. And then they end up saying, you know what, I'm getting too big, I want to do another show. Diet, diet, binge, wild pendulum swinging all over the place. That's bad. Yeah. And I think that very low calorie diet, I mean, if you just look at the Big Loser study, that was a perfect example of that. You know, like, just 8 weeks of severe dieting and, you know, over exercising. 6 years later, their ghrelin was still high. Their metabolic rate was still super depressed, super low. So I find that, especially with women in that sport, in bodybuilding, keto is freaking money. With men, I have my own thoughts, because there's also the need to get massive, and, you know, it's just really, really hard to do that with not having that insulin signal. Yeah, we can talk about, like, you know, the fact that, you know, ketones are pretty anabolic, you know, they're muscle sparing. But regardless, you know, you just pack on a lot more, not only because insulin is higher, but also the mTOR signal is much higher with the carbs. And you know, that's been proven in I think cultures where, like, carbs alone don't build muscle. Protein alone does build muscle, but carbs and protein is much, much greater effects, you know. But if it's your typical person that just wants to put on some muscle and it can be patient, there's no need, especially if you have metabolic issues, there's absolutely no need for carbs in bodybuilding. You know, I that's just my experience, and I've had a lot of athletes that have done awesome with it.
And on that topic, what are some of the recommendations for it? Again, you specified your average Joe Schmo person just want to get healthy and strong versus bodybuilder that's like, hey, this is my sport, this is what I want to do. What are some of the recommendations you give average person looking to get healthy and strong versus bodybuilder?
Yeah, it's like, I look at this like everything is like a decision tree. And as long as you start to, like, go down and know what to do at each, because there's people that can do very well with a certain approach, whether it be like bringing in some strategic carbs, or even, you know, certain training things that you can do. Some people can handle a lot more volume. Some people can train. Robert Sykes, my buddy Robert, I don't know if you know Keto Savage, amazing human being, natural pro, one of my best friends. And he, what was I going to say about him? I was just talking about him. Gosh, I lost my train of thought. Completely lost it, dude.
It's all good. It's all good.
I brought him up, and then I was like, no, but I think I was just talking about, you know, he's a natural pro, but I brought him up for a specific reason. Either way. Oh, so anyways, you asked me about, you know, the difference between Joe Schmo and oh, that's what it was. That Robert can train at a really high, lots of volume and lots of reps, and he can pretty much train in a very, very glycolytic type of training style, where it's like low rest, high reps, heavy, intense, and he does really well with it. But we had our genetics done, and we had it read on the air, and we have some key differences, even in just, you know, our muscle makeup, you know, more type 1 versus more type 2, things like that. And so the fact that he's never cheated, he just doesn't cheat. And it could be an argument that he's so fat adapted that the difference between his fuel preference and even a fat adapted athlete, there's even a difference there. So like if you look at the faster study, for example, there's a study where they saw fat adapted people, how intense can they go before it starts to kick over into more than 50% of the energy usage is from carbs, right? Your typical sugar burner, when they get to 55% of their VO2 max, that's it. They're going to start burning a lot more sugar, and they're going to start burning a lot less fat. Your fat adapted athlete is like 76% of your VO2 max. So you get to spare all that glycogen, those stored carbs in your muscle. And it makes it a lot easier because you're operating at a much higher intensity using fat as fuel. But so the decision tree there is, if you're like me, I cannot train high volume drop sets if I'm just doing keto. If I'm just doing keto and I'm not bringing in carbs, then I'm doing majority like resting like 2.5 minutes, training into like in like the 6 to 8 rep range, targeting what you call myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is associated more with strength, versus like sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which is like that high volume training, big ballooned up muscle bellies. But the difference is that it's also better to train that myofibrillar, not just because it's more in line with the ketogenic diet, but also because as you get bigger with muscle, you also get stronger. There's a drop-off point with the other type where you continue to build muscle and then it's not functional. You're not gaining strength, which who doesn't want to be stronger? But regardless, you could do a mix of both. But like if you're a person who, number one, if you're just getting started with the ketogenic diet, definitely make sure that you're taking in a lot of sodium, taking in a lot of magnesium. My recommendation is what's the labs? Oh my gosh, Barton's company. Upgraded labs, upgraded formulas. So they do nano minerals. You don't have to take like 800 milligrams of what do you call it? Magnesium, because the absorption is much better. So magnesium, potassium, and sodium that first month, like you got to do that. And definitely don't watch your calories, like eat a lot. Because for example, with me, and this has been shown also, that when you are on a ketogenic diet, you increase mitochondrial uncoupling, which is just energy escaping out of the cell. Like the amount of energy going in is nowhere near the amount of energy going out. So you start to get this metabolic advantage. So I was eating the same amount of calories when I first started keto as I was before, and I was starting to just melt. And I had to up my calories by like 700 calories just to stop, because I was burning a lot more. And so that's important as well. And then just take it easy with the training at first, because you have to give your body some time to get at least a little bit fat adapted. For me, I noticed like at the 3-month mark was when I started to see my pumps be similar to what they were before. And, and I was, my energy was better. And I had this mix now of like, wow, I have a lot more endurance. I could just do endurance stuff, and I can still train hard. So if you find that you're training, like you're doing an intense type of training, like a bodybuilding where you're doing drop sets, you're doing high rep stuff, even if you're doing high intensity might work because it's very short. It's like 15 minutes. So it may, if you know how to push it really, really hard for one set, and it's very hard to do that, then that would work. But a lot of people don't do well with that, and then their body gets overly stressed, their cortisol goes up, now they can't put on muscle, they can't lose fat. They got to make a decision: either change the way you train to match your diet, which I would say keep that rest higher, 2 to 3 minutes, focus on 6 to 8 rep range, 5 to 8 rep range, and push it hard. And if not, then keep going, and that goes for your protein intake, play around with that, that goes for a bunch of things. But, for me, I just noticed that overall, if I want to just be feeling good, looking good, I'm eating carnivore. And I'm lifting and I'm doing a bunch of walking. And that's for me, perfect. Where I'm at now, I'm 42 years old, man. Can't do it like I used to.
And man, it looked good for 42.
Appreciate it.
And it's, so I actually had somebody, it's so funny you kind of mentioned this piece. Somebody had reached out to me and they were asking me about how much meat do you eat in a day? I said, for me, I'm like 185 pounds, about 2 pounds of meat. I like to do a steak, either ribeye or a New York strip. And then I'll have a pound of ground beef and then salt it as I want, some butter sometimes. And for me, that's cool. And they're like, that's all? I can't believe that. There's no way. It's not all one carnivore size fits all.
Yep.
For me, it just works. And I eat my fill and I'm satisfied, but they couldn't fathom it. But some people who are maybe even smaller than me will get up to 3 pounds, or some people that are bigger than me might get 1.5 pounds, maybe 2 pounds. And they're like, oh, I can't even down this. So that's a good point of, for you, that works. For me, 2 pounds, boom, that's it. You're pushing upwards of 3, but you're like you're way bigger than I am.
Well, dude, honestly, I just think that, the key to so much in life is the ability to just put in the work, like, and it's not the hard work, like put in the care work where you're like, be intentional about what you're trying and, be proactive when it's not working. Like, I just think it's weird that people go to the gym year in and year out and they look the same and they don't wonder to them. I mean, a lot of people maybe do. And you can find the answers. Like, there's a million different reasons why. Like, maybe your training is just, your execution is bad. You're maybe going up in weight, you're maybe going up in reps, but you're not focused on execution. And that's where I'm like laser focused, because I can't handle the volume that I used to. So I have to truly standardize that stimulus every time and go deep in those sets so that I can get what I need to get to keep the muscle, to add the muscle. And then of course the diet is the majority of people just don't think about the diet, or maybe they do it the wrong way. They're getting misled, or they're being told a very unsustainable way. And then they just think to themselves, I'm sure some of them think to themselves like, I'm just not built like that person. They can do this and I can't. And they just don't know that there's another way. Like, and with ketos where a lot of the rejects go, because people that things don't work for them, and all of a sudden, and I don't mean rejects as disparaging, I just mean like nothing's working, the doctors don't know, and they try this keto diet, and of course when that happens, of course they're gonna be very dogmatic, and they're not gonna think anything else works, because that's the only thing that helped them. There's other ways though, like, and part of that is I don't think you ever need to be high carb. That's for sure. I think everybody should be eating a very, like your podcast, primal, very much more primal, much more traditional preparation of food, actual food, and not this crazy stuff that's been going on for the last 100 years where like our food is a science experiment. It's crazy. So anyways.
The execution you talked about.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a great point, because you could be eating quote unquote the right diet, but the execution for your training, and you mentioned like I take 2 to 3 minutes in between my sets, and that's something that I preach. Recovery is really big for me, and taking a step back from the mindset or this narrative of I have to go hard all the time and go all out, because if I'm not, then am I really working out?
Yeah.
That, like we have people that are pushing in the gym, and I have clients that I personally train that I have to like bring them down a little bit. And I was like, hey, I know you can do more than this, but we're really going to focus on, low rep count, really smooth time under tension, and really good form. And that's the focus of the workout. And they're like, well, I wasn't sore yesterday. That should not be the indicator if you had a good workout.
Yeah, of
Of just if
course.
I
Oh my gosh.
if yeah,
Yeah.
if you're too sore to work out the next day, I did something. I tell them all I did something wrong.
Or they're not eating enough, or they're not sleeping well too. I mean, that's those are other things too that
Yeah.
we don't take into account. I mean, hopefully by now, I remember starting 2019, that was the year that I really just zoned in on cortisol and stress and the importance of recovery and the importance of sleep and the importance of, like, if you are that stressed, though, don't even start the resistance training. Start by walking. Bring that allostatic load down. That stress bucket's overflowing. You got to bring that stuff down. Don't be just throwing other stuff. Okay, I'm going to do fasting and I'm going to do, just other stuff, high intensity stuff, and I'm stressed. Of course you're gonna just become skinny fat. You're not gonna lose, so it's the stress is huge. But the execution, man, that's something Ben Pekulski taught me. My great friend Ben, he's an amazing human being, and really the smartest person in the world when it comes to building muscle. And because of him, that's why I've kept my muscle on, because SSI is something he preaches, is set up, stabilize, and initiate. So if for every exercise you do, set up perfectly for your anatomy, which is like, if you've got really big chest, that you shouldn't be going higher than 30 degrees on the incline. You're going to start recruiting your shoulders. So that's the setup. If you have long femurs, you don't want to set the bar up high. You want to do a low bar squat and use more. That's me, because I'm all femurs and all legs and arms. I'm very small torso. If you're got a longer torso and you got some short legs, it's good to be upright. Like a traditional back squat, Olympic, back squat. So that's the setup. The stabilize is just making sure that the joint that is moving is completely stable, and nothing else is moving except for the joint that's supposed to move, and everything else is locked. And then initiate is the last and most important, and it's how to start the movement. If you know how to get a contraction of a muscle, and this is just bodybuilding, but I mean, everybody wants to look good, so this is for everybody. If you want to get a contraction in the lengthened position, everybody knows how to, let's say, like with a fly, when I'm here and the muscle's shortened, that part super easy. Or a bicep curl, when it's shortened, that's, everybody knows how to get a contraction there. But how do I get a contraction when it's in the lengthened? How do I zone in on that? And initiating it the right way tends to do that. And this is what I learned from Ben. So, like, for example, it's a pretty much, if I think of every muscle that I do this for, yeah, like it's almost like you're flexing the antagonist of that muscle when it's in its most lengthened state, and you will feel at the insertion where that muscle, just like I'm gonna feel, if I drive my triceps into the preacher bench right before and I flex them, I will feel that contraction in the lengthened position. And now my job is to hold that the whole time, chase that, hold on to it, zone in on it. That's a big difference from what people do, And so, like, people unfortunately don't know that. And if they did, they'd save time. They'd be able to not only focus on what works and stick to that, and don't try to reinvent the wheel with a million different things. Just pick 4 exercises you're going to do every day and do those really, really well. But it's just so much better, man. It really just, and you're going to be less stressed. You're also going to learn, because of the level of focus that takes. It's this ability to go. It's really good to make you resilient, because you're going into that sympathetic when you're in that set, because you're just putting everything into it. You're focused on the breathing, but you're also like squeezing the crap out of that muscle. And then you have to turn it off completely in the rest period. And that becomes a superpower if you learn how to do that, because now, instead of being in that low level stress during your rest period, because you're, just on your phone, that's a lot of people do that. And, I will say I listen to music a lot. So I'm not going to say I'm not on my phone, but I do. If you can do that, you'll see that you handle even stressful situations in life better, because you'll have that ability to go from sympathetic to parasympathetic and switch it back on and off. That's a big superpower. So
Yeah, people focus on, I like to say people focus on the flashy more, you know,
yep.
because they see it on Instagram, they see it on whatever and YouTube. But it really, and you hit the nail on the head. You're like, let's focus on, you know, X 5 or 6 movements and get
Yep.
really, really good at that. I had, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Strong First
Oh yeah.
programs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had, you'll love I just had Fabio Zonin on. His
Oh,
podcast is coming
nice.
up. He's the man. He's awesome. I did
That's
a
awesome.
barbell certification with him. But I have Brett Jones, who's a master instructor. He's one of the head of their, the entire education of Strong First. And we were talking back and forth about like developing skill. And I was telling a
Oh
story
yeah.
about a college wrestling room. And we were, because we were going back and forth. He wrestled, I wrestled. And when you go into a college wrestling room, you would think you're going to see the special sauce. You're going to see all this cool stuff, and it's going to be really like elite,
High tech.
high tech, whatever. You're going to get the special equation or whatever. But it's the most basic
Yep.
wrestling practice. It's like we do the exact same thing, except they do it better.
Yeah.
They just do it really good, like a go behind, a double leg. And I'm sitting there watching, you know, I'm watching, like I downloaded every single college wrestling room, like coaching thing, because I coached for a while. And I'm watching these live wrestling practices. I'm like, we do the exact same thing. And it just, but they do it so good, and just getting really good at the basics versus I'm doing the flashy kettlebell movement. I'm doing the flashy, you know, clean and snatch, you know, barbell work, which is really hard to do in the general population. Doing an overhead barbell snatch is really hard.
I didn't even do that with my college athletes. Like you know, when I went to VCU and I was the head strength coach for basketball there, they were doing some snatches. I took that out. You know, it's like I understand look, that's triple extension, you know, hip extension important for jumping. I get that completely. There's a million other ways that we could do that without risking. Why can't so and so play? Why can't he shoot? Oh, because he messed up his wrist in the weight room. That's a strength coach's nightmare, you know, and that goes for, you know, even barbell lifts. This is what I'll say. Obviously, for me, it was a huge part of building who I am. And I was very focused on keeping, you know, I was obsessed with staying healthy, you know, so my back, I never had any issues. Plus, my coach worked with Stuart McGill, who is the back expert. He's the best. And I learned a lot about that. But where was I going with that? Totally lost my train of thought again, man. This time of night, I'm just like
Overhead snatches.
oh yeah. So I was gonna say, like with barbell lifts, right? You know, even a squat, you know, I can obviously still see how important a squat is, especially if you just understand what is the goal of it. Structural integrity, you know, strong trunk, strong. If you have that strong core, that's where all movement is generated from. Then yeah. But then someone like me, I don't put a bar on my back anymore. You know, I'll hit the hack squat. Also, because if I'm focused on building muscle, and I understand that there's got to be at least a little bit of my training to really hit that hard training, you know, that one set type of deal. And I don't want to have to worry about if I fail, I'm going to get hurt. You know, if I fail on a hack squat, if I fail on machines, I can pretty much fail without risking a catastrophic injury. So, but then at the same time, you got to keep that structural integrity. You got to continue to do things that keep your trunk strong and all that. But yeah, like just you have to find the things that work for you, and then you got to standardize the stimulus. Like, why are you going to go up in weight? You said you did 4 sets of 8. Can you tell me that you did 4 sets of 8? Did you do 8 the last set? You probably did 4 or 5. And then like you went somewhere for the last 3 and you didn't really do them. And now you're going to go up in weight next week. Why? Muscles don't sense load. They sense length and tension, you know, increase the lever arm for that length to create more damage, and make sure that there's tension, which is literally the contraction. So
Yeah, form is in developing skill is huge, and getting I'm a PE teacher that's my main gig,
Oh,
and
cool.
I have the fifth graders in the fitness center all the way to eighth graders, and one of the first things I tell them, I go, you know what the number one reason people get hurt in the weight room is, and they're like, oh, they trip over the treadmill or they trip over dumbbell. I'm like, nope, and then I'm like, ego.
Oh yeah.
100% is ego, because I want to put it over my head, or I want to look cool with that big weight. It's like, no, take a step back, get good at it,
Yep.
develop the skill, take your time. This is a long journey. This
Oh
is
yeah.
not, I'm not kidding. They want to get fit next week. They're looking in the
Yeah.
mirror, they're flexing their biceps. I'm like, you didn't do nothing today.
Man, Instagram, I blame social media. Everybody's got to be it's hurting, the ability to build muscle because people don't eat in a surplus long enough to really build muscle, and then they get impatient, so they just get on a bunch of drugs.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it's at this point, the things are so bad, like in our environment, that low test is much more prevalent. I heard the other day that the 26-year-old in 2023 has the same testosterone as a 70-year-old in 2000, the year 2000. That was when I went to college.
I
That's
heard
wild.
I heard another stat that I think it was from 19, the level of the average level of male testosterone today is at half of the average of the 60s.
Oh yeah, I would assume it's even less than that, but yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
it's wild. On training, what is your thoughts? I'd like to get your take on this. Training fasted.
So I used to do it all the time. I'm now not a fan of it anymore, just because last year I went down the leptin rabbit hole. I highly recommend it. It is as profound to me as what I found with keto, because leptin is such a master hormone. It's a satiety hormone that's made in your fat cells. It basically deals with every hormone system in the body. It deals with the steroid hormones, it deals with thyroid, it helps you convert, T4 to T3, it does all this stuff. And because of that, a lot of what we do is feeding into leptin resistance. And then of course the dieting and regaining and dieting and regaining, every time you gain more fat, you're gonna start producing more leptin, and that's gonna start flooding the brain. And the leptin's job is to tell the brain that you're full and that it's okay to burn fat. And when you start flooding the brain more and more because of those rebounds, those up and downs, you over time you develop that leptin resistance. The brain stops getting the signal, and now it tells your body you can't burn fat and you got to be hungry. And so because of that, leptin is a very circadian focused hormone. And we know that cortisol is highest in the morning. It peaks at like 6:30, helps you wake you up. And leptin is lowest in the morning. We also know that if you eat something, even if it's a low carb, high fat food, like a high protein, with a little bit of fat, there's going to be an insulin bump because, insulin's job is to shuttle those nutrients in, right? And if we know that insulin has an inverse relationship with cortisol, you get a little insulin bump, you drive your cortisol a little bit lower, and you're giving your body food when your leptin is the lowest, which protects you for later in the day, because then later in the day your leptin is highest at night. You shouldn't be hungry at night. And I started to really think about that, and I started to add, basically, if you wanted to do fasting, I was telling people it's a lot harder to do it this way, but it's a lot better. You'll sleep better. It's basically, instead of waiting until lunch and training fasted, have a little bit of breakfast and then have a post-workout breakfast and then eat dinner. So it's just a matter of, and I say that because a lot of people train in the morning. I train in the morning. So this morning I had leftover strip and chuck eye from yesterday, and I just had like a bunch left over that I very rare cooked it, and I just put it there and threw it on there and had that, and then I trained. So that will help you bring your leptin back, and then it also you'll burn more fat, because you're just awake for that time at night. We know that it's also part of leptin. You're not supposed to eat at night, like where our body, you feed the body the same meal in the morning, and in the night you have a different postprandial response. That's been shown, so that's why. And now also, training fasted depends on how you're training. I think training fasted, the way I mentioned, which I think is appropriate for keto, I think it's totally fine, and that's how I did it forever. I'm only now doing this now, and this is just, like I said, where I'm at. And I think I would recommend it just because so much of what we do is driving cortisol too high, and it's leading to a lot of the time where people just crash their cortisol, or they get those inverted cortisol patterns where, because every day you wake up and you have coffee on an empty stomach when your cortisol's highest, and your coffee's driving it even higher, and you're starting to really like generate a bunch of cortisol during the day, and then over time in the morning when you wake up, your body is like no cortisol, and so now you're waking up groggy and tired. And then what ends up happening throughout the day, that stress builds that cortisol. Now at night you have your cortisol's high when it's supposed to be lowest, and you're tired and wired. So a lot of what I do now is to combat that, because that's what most people are doing. They're having their coffee, going to work, having lunch, and I would just say, think about that. Other than that, not really against training fasted, unless, like I said, you're very stressed. That would be something that I wouldn't add to that stress bucket, because it definitely will. So, but you can totally operate fine, especially if you're fat adapted. For me, it was always, my pre-workout was literally coffee and fat, whether it was just butter, or I've been doing keto brains now for like 3-4 years, and I love it. It's MCT, alpha GPC, L-theanine, and lion's mane. So it's awesome.
Is lion's mane, is that mushroom?
Yeah, it's it's an adaptogenic mushroom. It's been shown to basically increase BDNF and NGF, which help you grow new neurons, neural growth factor, and brain derived neurotrophic factor. And it's improved mild cognitive impairment in old people. It literally helps you keep your neurons and keeps, it's just a great and it's a freaking mushroom. Those adaptogenic mushrooms are unreal, man. They all do some pretty cool stuff, and they're adaptogenic because they kind of like, they work with your body, like what you need, they give you more of it, which is, it's wild to think about that.
You called that, so that you put all those things in there all by itself, like, or
So
one item?
It's basically a powder. So
Okay.
the MC, it's like a kind of coconut flavored powder, because it's derived from coconut, the MCTs are. And then it has like all of those supplements in it. And I throw that in with my coffee in the blender with butter. Not a bunch. I used to 2 tablespoons of, just now it's like, blend it and drink it. And when you froth it up, it's got that nice big foam. I would have that like 30 minutes before training all the time, for years. I'm talking about like probably like for 5 years. So what I've been doing now is just a little bit different. It's just since last September, probably. Yeah, I think it was like August, September.
Yeah, I go back and forth with when people ask me about fasting. So I did an Ironman just like
awesome.
like 2 years ago, and one of the big things I wanted to do was I wanted to do it fat adapted. That was my big thing. I got on keto. I started doing carnivore, like after I was kind of on carnivore keto, and then the pandemic hit, and I just locked down the house. You're ordering food. I was getting thick, like with 2Ks capital. I was getting not in a good way. And I was like, man, I got to do something. So the gyms were closed. Everything was closed. I'm like, well, I can I got a bike. I can bike. I can run. You know, there's a lake right here. I'm in Chicago. Like I go
Okay.
swim. I can swing kettlebells, all kinds of stuff. And I started doing a lot of, just to push that fat adaptation, I started doing a lot of fasted running, fasted workouts, everything. And I would do
Well, with
coffee.
cardio, fasted running is like awesome. Like that's a little bit different though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It,
I'm much more in favor of that, especially if you want to train to drive that fat adaptation for sure.
I talk to people about it all the time. I go on, like, I'll never forget. I went on a 18-mile run before work one day, and I had a water bottle with the LMNT electrolytes in it, and that's all I had. And I ran, whatever. And I didn't even have. I had a coffee before I left. I get to work and I'm like all sweaty and like I got my bag, like my little like camel pack thing, and the dean of students is like, "Dude, what are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, I'm good." He's like, "You are drenched." I go, "Yeah, I just did 18." He's like, "Before work?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I didn't even have a lunch. Like, I didn't eat anything. And then lunch, like we could eat at the school. You can go out wherever. School's got pretty good food. And I didn't even have lunch until like 1 or 2 o'clock, but I started running at like 5 a.m.,
That's wild. That is
and
awesome.
yeah. I tell people, just like, I have never ending energy when I do those cardio endeavors.
Yeah.
Really didn't really eat too much. I had different things. I heard you even on the podcast talk about UCAN.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had
Did you have UCAN for the Ironman or was that before?
Yeah, I did. So I feel kind of stupid doing it. It's like I go against my own advice, but I really just tested UCAN on the Ironman. So my first,
Oh, dude, on the day of the Ironman?
yeah, that's
Oh,
stupid.
dude, I did that once at a powerlifting meet, so don't worry. I did
we
exactly. I don't
all
ever try anything on game day, but I
we
did
all
that too.
do it. We all do it.
Yeah. Yep.
I did. I would go. My first like century ride I ever did was completely fasted, 100 miles on the bike. I had like
Amazing.
I stopped to get coffee or whatever. But I'm not sure if you know Casey Ruff for Boundless Body.
Sounds very familiar. Yeah, Casey Ruff. Yeah.
Yeah, he's in the keto space. And I reached out to him, and he's a cyclist and he's super big on carnivore. And he's like, "Yeah, try UCAN. If you're gonna go that far, like if you want something, UCAN's good because it's not a ton of carbs. It's gonna be slow releasing.
Yeah, it
It's not.
doesn't raise insulin or your blood sugar. I don't know if you know, I did a lot of work with UCAN, and
Oh,
actually,
I didn't know that.
yeah, we did. I basically designed kind of like an informal study involving like a bunch of like basically my keto friends, like people like, Logan Delgado, Goody Beats, Dr. Fit and Fabulous, Jamie. And we basically were all trained athletes, fat adapted athletes. All of us had been on a ketogenic diet at least a year, 2 years. And we basically designed what to do. We did like blood sugar and ketone testing, baseline, before, after, and then it turned into a paper that UCAN released. Dr. Jeff Volek basically wrote a white paper on our results. And like, from the research that they already have, that it doesn't raise your insulin, it doesn't raise your blood sugar. It just fills up your glycogen stores, which is exactly what you want, usable carbs. But it's another thing to see it in action. And it's like, I even had periods, I got away from it because it didn't work for some, but it worked really well. But I even had like, for peak week strategy, like loading up on some UCAN. And it worked really well for one guy, and for a few other ones, I just kind of got away from it just because it's already such a complicated week that I didn't want to. And then I found other ways to do that just with sodium and increasing the calories. Just basically refeed day 24 hours before the show, sodium, bumping it up. You start this like 6 weeks out, you start trialing this to nail it so that you know exactly, how much sodium should I add. If I add too much, I'm going to wake up watery, and so we would take the pictures before, take them after. So anyways, I just get on these rants, dude, with this stuff because I
No,
love it.
yeah,
I
it's
love
good.
it.
I didn't know. I didn't know you were affiliated
But
with
yeah,
them. I was just shouting them out, yeah, because
UCAN's awesome.
it's so good. And I only needed, like, I think I had two, in which it was 15 carbs, 20 carbs. They were the
Yeah.
gel, like, so
Oh, you
I'm
had the
doing,
gel. Those gels are awesome. Yeah, those gels are
yeah,
good.
banana strawberry. It was
Yes, so
fantastic.
good.
Yeah. And
Yep.
I finished the race and I felt great. And somebody asked me, they're like, oh, my stomach is killing me. How many gel blocks did you have? And I said, I didn't have any gel blocks. I only had like 30, I don't know, 30 carbs. They looked at me like I was like my hair was on fire.
Those people are getting diarrhea because of all that. They just can't. After a while, your body just can't intake the amount that you need to sustain you for that hour, like whatever 200 something calories of carbs, whatever, maybe it's probably like, what is that, 50 calories or 50 carbs? You start to load that hour after hour. Oof.
There's coaches that wouldn't even work with me because I told them I want to do a carnivore fat adaptive. First, they said I was going to die. They're like, you're going to die. So that was number one. And then some recommendations I was getting from coaches was 100 carbs an hour. They're like, you have to eat 100 carbs every hour on the bike because that's going to be the only time you're really going to get all your nutrition in. I was like, what? That's insane. But going back to the fasted thing, I like the flip side of that is, to your point, I find that for me, fasted cardio workouts in the morning, I like to say I'm retired now. I'm retired. I did my Ironman. I'm retired. I'll do some cardio every now and again, and I'll just go on a long run for fun, but it's not my main thing. I tell people I did the Ironman not to be healthy. I did it to complete it. And those are two different avenues. But now I find myself, if I'm going to do a lifting session in the morning, I kind of enjoy I used to do everything fasted because I'm like, I got to be fat adapted. But now I enjoy eating a bigger breakfast. I'll just do ground beef, like a pound of ground beef.
That's a big one for me too.
Yeah, put it all in a bowl. And not only like will I eat the ground beef, but how like Cocoa Puffs at the end, I just sip the rest of the juice or butter or whatever else is in there. And I feel good. And I'm actually really not hungry that much later. I feel good in my lifts, and I'm not super over full. It's only a pound. I mean, some people are like, it's a pound, it's a lot. I'm like, it's not a lot.
They don't need a pound because they're filling themselves. They can't even imagine because they're having like maybe 6 or 8 ounces, but they're having all this other stuff that is like, a carbohydrate. For every carb you have, you're holding on to 3, for every gram, that's 3 grams of fluid that you're going to kind of hold on to. So your stomach will get real full just from the volume, and you won't eat the most important thing, which is the meat.
Yeah. And on that topic, so what are some nutrition misconceptions that you are tired of correcting?
I mean, I would say obviously, this like blind hatred for keto, that is just shows ignorance, because I've done so many different approaches, and I'm always open to learning about different things. And like it's just the fact that pretty much everyone can benefit from at least a period of keto throughout the year. Maybe like if you're lucky enough that your season is in the summer and your off season is in the winter, even better, because that's probably the best time to do keto anyways, because in the winter, traditionally, you're not going to have access to all the stuff you're going to have in the fall and the spring. So generally speaking, if you're in a cold enough climate, you're going to have to eat carnivore, in the winter, or at least closer to it. There's only so much you can store. And just, post competition, if you're banged up, to lower inflammation. So there's just a bunch of, and then you start getting into, different endeavors that you can do. So I guess the blind hatred for keto, that's one. The stuff that used to bother me, thank God, has died. Like I'll tell you, like from 2016 when I started, probably till about like 2018, 2019, I feel like that's when we started to realize, at least we as in like a society, because I never did low protein. I at the beginning, there were times that I definitely played with it, and even like in a cut that I did with my buddy Robert, my protein got down to 75 for the last week, and that was just his approach, and it actually worked awesome. But it used to be that, people be like, don't eat too much protein, it's going to turn into sugar, and they're talking about gluconeogenesis, and it's like, gluconeogenesis is not just something that your body just says, hey, I'm just going to do this. I mean, everything has a cost, it's expensive to turn protein into sugar unless you need it. If you need it, if there's a need, it's kind of like, so, but then the benefits on the other hand of eating the protein far outweigh the risk of gluconeogenesis. And if you feel that that you're afraid of the protein, then test yourself postprandially. Eat like this much protein and then test yourself 30 minutes, an hour, and 2 hours and see if there's a glucose response. I did it. I started with a pound. I went to 20 ounces. I went to 24. I went to 28. And then when I went to 2 pounds in a sitting, I think there was like a 15-point jump.
And you're talking about with a glucose monitor?
Yeah, with the glucose monitor. And, like it's a demand driven process. So that used to be a big issue. That's gone. I'm kind of, it's so many new people come in and it's like, I feel like the old timer. I was around when it started, 2016, really was, I just kind of stepped away last year, even though I'm still friends with everybody. I still probably go to KetoCon and I don't think I'll speak just because I don't feel that, I'm doing that and involved in that much that I have anything important to say because I'm not doing the research that I used to do,
But all the stuff is important, man. All the stuff is. So I think, and plus you're going to get more people that go. This is going to be my first year going to KetoCon. Actually, I just got
nice.
my tickets. Yeah, I wanted to go last year, but I was doing.
I literally spoke every year. That was from day one. I've been on that stage. It's you're gonna love it, man.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. In terms of the anabolic window, when people talk about
that one. That one could get me going for sure.
So what do you hear? Because I hear all the things that you need to do. You had to eat. If you do not eat at this moment in time after your workout, you will not gain muscle.
Well, I mean, I'm very dispassionate about this because it's like you can't say anything. You really have no way of knowing that. If you comb through the research, which is where I started, I wanted to know. And what I saw was that everybody agreed that having a specific amount of amino acids, like, 2-3 grams of leucine, post workout is very, very important. Nobody even wanted to touch how much, what the timing is, and thank God it was, Jacob Wilson, if you know him, Muscle PhD. I haven't spoken to him in years, but at the time we were talking a lot, and I was like, what's the research on this? Can you tell me anything? Because he's a PhD and he looks through this stuff and he's focused on bodybuilding. Like he was in Generation Iron, he was in that part one. I think he might have been in part two as well. But anyways, there was one study and he showed it to me, and it was the difference between an untrained athlete, someone who's been training consistently for a few years, and like an elite athlete. And if I remember correctly, that untrained athlete, if you're just talking about the risk of not eating protein, that ends at about 12 hours for them. So they can go 12 hours after. Then you get a little bit more, and then you're looking at elite athletes can technically wait 4 hours. So my rule of thumb, if someone asked me, would be 4 hours post training is as long as I'd wait. Because the thing is, it never gets to that point, because if you're actually training to eating to gain muscle, you're probably going to have to eat 3 to 4 meals a day. You're going to have to just because, number one, you're getting that leucine signal more often, which is very anabolic. So that's great. And number two, you're probably gonna have to do it that way because of all the food you're gonna have to eat. Like, if you're a guy, I tell them, like, start at, if you're trying to gain weight, just if you want to start at a number, multiply your goal body weight by 20. Start there. So if you're 180 pounds, you want to be 200, start at 4,000. And then, up the calories or lower the calories by 50 or so. That's my number usually. As things happen, if you start to gain too much weight, too quickly, things like that. So yeah, what were we talking about, like, as far as the because I'll just go on these rants and then just
talk about like misconceptions.
So the protein window, man. Yeah, so the protein window, 30 minutes after your workout, nothing's going to happen if you don't get protein 30 minutes after your workout. And, you don't have to rush to get it in. and feel like you need to just drink a protein shake. That's what a lot of people think, like it's not that I'm completely against them, but most of them are trash. I highly recommend the two that I recommend are the Santa Cruz Paleo beef protein, grass-fed beef protein, which literally is just it's grass-fed beef powder, and the same thing with the oh my gosh, I have a code for them and everything, and I'm forgetting the prime protein from Equip Foods. The Equip chocolate grass-fed beef protein is freaking amazing. It's literally 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef powder, stevia, and cocoa powder, and it tastes delicious. But I would prefer real food. It's just going to be much more than just amino acids, and the protein. You're getting minerals and all this other good stuff, and plus you're eating something and you're chewing something, which is what your body is going to absorb those nutrients better, because just the chewing action, it's going to be way different than just chugging a drink. It's way different how those nutrients are assimilated. So go figure, it's the natural way.
Yeah, just back to the basics. Back to
Yep.
the basics.
Yep.
I remember I used to, I don't know if they have them out where in Tampa where you're at, but like exports, do you have those out there?
Oh, I've heard of that. It's kind of like what do you call it? Like X Games?
No, export is they're popular in the Midwest out here. It's a gym. And
wait a second. Is this the one that is kind of like CrossFit?
No, it's just like a box gym, and they started small and they just started popping up everywhere. Think of like Planet Fitness, but not as like crappy, I guess. I don't want to say crappy, but they're super popular around here, and every town has an export in it, and it's open. Some are open 24 hours, and everybody who's in the kind of fitness or like that's young, or just getting like an ACE certificate will work at an export. And I was the overnight guy because they just didn't have any positions, and they're like, we need somebody overnight. But overnight's awesome because nobody's in there and you can work out. So it's great.
That's awesome.
And I was in college, I was just doing my homework or whatever. But you have to go to this sales course before you can even step on the floor. And the sales course is basically, it wasn't really I had to do it, but it didn't apply to me because I was overnight. But everybody else that was during the day shifts or afternoon or whatever, you had to hit quotas. And
pushing supplements.
You had to, like, if you didn't hit a quota, you would get reprimanded for it. You would get like written up for it. But they told us this whole script on what to tell people to sell the protein shakes, to sell the protein powder. You have to have protein, 100 carbs and anywhere from 25 to 50 grams of protein after your workout, or else it's not even going to be worth the workout kind of deal. And it was I just remember I was sitting there, I was like, wow, that's a lot of carbs. Like, oh man. I'm like, but I bought it because then I started doing, like, I got to have more carbs then. And I started doing, I'm a 20, maybe 19, 20 years old.
Wow.
And then I started getting really heavy just because I'm just like, I'm going to lose my muscle. But
it's going to walk away. It's going to fly away.
That's it. Segueing into like that nutrition piece, you're a dad, right? And you got some kiddos. How do you navigate cooking for kids and going places? And once you see the veil drop of just the food industry, and you can see how crappy it is. So how do you navigate that with the kiddos, and what do you cook for them?
Well, I was blessed, and so I have to recommend this way because it is going to be the least speed bumps, the smoothest and the most enjoyable, and the probably best chance that you will really set that foundation to a point where you won't have to be worrying about it because they just eat that way. And that's to start before the mother's pregnant. Make sure that you're both super healthy, and then go into same thing. Like when both of my sons, we weaned them both with soft-boiled egg yolks and raw liver. That was their first thing that ever touched their mouth. That was food. And it just shows these kids are just super healthy, off the charts, always have been with their height and weight. And so that really helps because we just basically, their palate didn't start to get more less sensitive from all the gut junk until much, much later in life. You know, they didn't know what a cake was. They would, you know, they were on Halloween. They thought these things, the goal was to collect things and put them in they didn't know it was candy, you know, when they were really young. And so, but that being said, a lot of people are not coming from that situation. And I understand that. That's part of what we did with the podcast, is trying to tell these families, like, look, it's not just knowing how the right way to eat and the right way to feed them, which, by the way, is the way we eat, because they're humans too, who are just a little bit smaller, and in fact probably can benefit even more from this because they're growing. And the stuff that you're going to provide them with when you're eating the right diet is just going to everything to maximize their potential and their brain development and their muscles and everything, you know, setting up their how easy it's for them to stay lean when they're older from what they're eating when they're young. So it's super important. But you know, a lot of people coming in later, and I just I have my style of parenting, and I think it works really well. Is just really just be open and have conversations. Like, look, literally just talk to them about yourself. It has nothing to do with them. You know, a lot of people, in fact, don't even worry about the child, and it's not until much later that they're like, wait a second, why am I buying cereal for them? I'm not eating this. I just like somehow disconnected the fact that this is not good for me, but yet it's still good for my kid. You know what I mean? So, um, so I would just recommend, like, if they're old enough, if they're young enough, then you can just go ahead and start changing things and rip the band-aid off and go through that, because no one's ever going to die from not eating, like, for a few, especially for a few days. It's not going to happen, because my boys, you know, we started them, they were like pretty much paleo. And when I did powerlifting, you know, I fell by the wayside. I went down that wrong path. I ate a bunch of carbs, and then we started to get undisciplined with them, and so I had to bring them back in when I did keto. And it was literally like a day or two of just poutiness. And I remember, like, the second or third day, their mother came home with like a bunch of groceries, and they just tore through the turkey and cheese, and like they were like, oh, can I have some avocado, you know? And it was like game on. And so, but so if they're young, just execute, still talk to them, tell them why, you know, like I always say, like, you know, so and so, I thought that what I used to eat was food. I found out recently that it's actually not food. It's not even food. And when I learned that, I realized, wow, I have all these things that I don't feel good about, like my physically, like my back hurts, this, that. And I found out that if I eat the right foods, that I'll feel much better. And so that's what I'm doing now. So if you ever have questions about it, you know, feel free to ask. I'm happy to talk about it. And don't even talk to them about it. Like, well, talk to them about it, but don't put it on them yet. You know, just have those conversations if they're old enough. And if they want to join, you know, you're obviously free to offer them, but it's got to be massaged in, because it's a very tricky with kids. And so there's ways to do it, and you just introduce it. If there's things that they really love, look, if the child is only eating chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, it's just not sustainable. Come on, like, grow up. Like, they can't eat that way. It's terrible. I'm just like so bad for them. Um, you have to put your foot down, but, like, you know, you want to be able to talk to them so that it's just a bigger thing with parenting. You want them to trust you, you know, like, be honest with them, be open with them. And there's things that you do, of course, to put yourself in a successful situation. Number one, get all the junk out of the house. It shouldn't be there. You know, donate it if you want, whatever. And number two, you know, things like when you're going out to eat, on the way to the restaurant, look at the menu already and find like two options on there that you know are acceptable to you in the way that you arrange them. So you, on the car ride, say, hey, do you want this and this and this with this? Or do you want this and this with this? And whatever they pick, they have a choice, and they're both good choices. You know what I mean? Now, we have our indulgences from time to time, you know, and they know that that's what it is, as indulgence. But the most important thing is not that they eat perfectly, even though they're pretty darn good. Um, it's that when they grow up, they will know that if something slips with their health or their performance, that the first thing they're going to do is not going to be go to a doctor. It's going to be like, I need to look at my diet and my work, like my activity. What am I doing right now? What can I change? And that is the most powerful thing, because then it makes them they can't be manipulated into getting fed into the healthcare grinder, where they're like, start with one medication, then oh, well, I noticed here you got this now. I'm going to prescribe this for you. And now it's like, it's like 20 medications, dude, terrible.
Yeah. I mean, at a young age, they're learning these skills to take control of their own lives.
Oh yeah.
Which a lot of
That's huge.
adults don't have that. They just, oh, this is normal eating. I feel fine. Well, you think you feel fine because you don't know what it is.
That happens always. I feel so good. They don't know what it is to feel good. I was just going to say that. And like, that is so freaking true. And I think a lot of the time people, look, if you're considering trying this, you have to understand that your brain right now is not the way it's going to be even in a few weeks. And so with your poor carb addicted brain, that's, very much thinking to yourself, like, how can I not eat this? How can I have no cheat days? That was what my ex used to say to me, like, what do you mean no cheat days? And I was like, yeah, I've been reading. It's probably not a good thing to cheat on this, it's not good to have carbs and fat, and so your brain will change, and you will start to see that your preferences will change, but you don't know until you try it, you just don't.
And just the big one, as a parent, leading by example.
That's it.
Kids are
model the behavior. The behavior you want to see. That's for sure. Like, that goes for training too. These kids, I'll never forget, like, anytime they found like a broomstick or something, they thought it was a squat bar. They're putting on their back, and they're like little babies squatting down, with broomsticks and stuff. We were back then, for like 2 years, I did CrossFit and competed in that. And like, that was awesome because they were in their car seats, still babies, watching us, front row seat to us working out. That's all they saw. And so I think that's very valuable, because to this day, my boys are just always outside. They never were stuck on, first of all, we didn't have video games. Now they got their Oculuses, both of them get on that, but that's even then, like, they're like doing gorilla tag, they're like running, and, so if you set that foundation, you start to see that, even because think about it, if you do the opposite, you could do one way, which is just basically feed them garbage. You could do another way where you just restrict the heck out of them. And then they just, when they get a moment of freedom, since you didn't take the time to teach them about why you're doing what you're doing, and you kind of, the approach might have really messed with them, they're not going to learn that lesson, that valuable lesson, that you can basically get healthy by eating the right foods, which that sucks. That sucks because the kid didn't know, but a lot of the parents don't know either. That's why it was so important for us to spread that message, spread the message that, health is totally within your grasp. You don't need an expert. All you need to do is like be able to learn on your own, be your own stakeholder, like the biggest stakeholder in your health, and decide for yourself, because no one knows better than you. And so that's why we're trying to do that, because I think a lot of people, they just are like, you know what, when it comes to health, I don't know. There's this person saying this, that person saying this, and I'm just going to go to the doctor because they're the doctor and they're going to tell me, and they don't know crap about how to stay healthy. They can manage sickness, but they don't know, unless they actually do it. Like, a lot of doctors that I know have taken it upon themselves to do that. And then they're deadly because they can talk the medical side and the health side.
Yeah. Pre-care is huge.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about, or why don't people worry about pre-care? This is a side note, but it's like, I think it's just, there's no money in it.
There's no money in it. 100%. That is one. I mean, it's simple incentives, people are going to do what they're incentivized to do.
Yeah. Well, Danny, this is awesome. This is great. We went through a training, food, family life, things like that. If somebody wants to connect with you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, honestly, DannyVega.ms. That's what I'm still active on. Everything else I've kind of just taken a step back from. But yeah, my Instagram, DannyVega.ms.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for taking the time to come on the Primal Foundations podcast. And to everybody listening, thank you. And we'll see you on the next episode.